Bore da, and welcome to Sunday morning on Talking Wales. It's nice to be with you, and today we're joined by three special guests. First of all, Jonathan Williams. Jonathan Rhys-Williams is a solicitor at Ultra Law, UK's first non-profit law firm, co-founder of the UBI, Universal Basic Income Lab Wales, and is a member of the Welsh Government's Technical Advisory Group for their Basic Income Pilot. Croeso, Jonathan. Rhiannon James is a political journalist, originally from Swansea. She works for the Press Association as part of their Westminster team, and has been following the various party leaders on the campaign trail. And finally, Mark Hooper is a Plaid Cymru County Councillor in the Vale of Glamorgan. He's working to establish Bank Camria, the mutually owned community bank for Wales, and he also worked as a special advisor in the Welsh Government until the summer as part of the cooperation agreement. And he also likes to make the bold claim that he ran Plaid's general election campaign in the Vale, securing the highest ever vote of 7%. So welcome to you all. Croeso. So just before we start, just for those who are viewing, who maybe don't know what Talking Wales is, here's just a quick explainer of what Talking Wales is and what we're trying to achieve. We're building a community and we want you to be part of it. A news and information service designed to keep Welsh citizens informed, a space where issues that matter and impact our daily lives can be discussed, developing ideas and challenging those in power, sharing news and information via digital radio, YouTube, social media and online, using clear, understandable language, on the platforms you use most often. It'll be owned by you, our members, serving all of Wales and its people wherever they are in the world. Join us on our journey and help us create a better Wales. So yes, so that's Talking Wales. So we'll get in to start the discussion. So Thursday night, general election, Friday morning, early hours, we started getting the results through. So what did you make of the election and the results? And I will go to Rhiannon first. Rhiannon, what was your take from a Westminster perspective of the results in Wales?
I think we were obviously expecting Labour to do very well. But I was personally, I don't know if I was naive, but I was personally shocked with how well Reform had done. You know, in Llanelli, you had Nia Griffith retaining her seat, but it was very close with the Reform candidate, Gareth Beer, who I think he got maybe 1,500 votes less than she did. So places like that did shock me, although I had heard that Llanelli was veering towards Reform. I wasn't expecting it to be that close, to be honest. And I think it was still a shock, although we were expecting a lot of Conservatives to lose their seat, to see those senior Conservatives, you know, people that have been around for a while, like Alan Cairns and David Davis, losing their seats.
Yeah, because we've got three former Welsh Secretary of State who lost their seats, and obviously now with Wales being a Tory-free zone, they're going to have to choose a shadow from the ranks of what they have left. Jonathan, what was your take on Thursday?
Well, I'm really pleased that there's no longer a Tory in Wales, to be perfectly honest. I think that was a great thing. I same as Rhiannon, really. I suppose quite shocked at how well Reform done, but I think, you know, if you dig into it a little bit, then it's not too much of a surprise, really. I think you look at, you know, Nigel Farage, for example, launched his campaign in Merthyr. There was obviously some thinking behind that. I think going to the Senate election, they probably think they're going to do pretty well here. But I think it was a foregone conclusion. I mean, I didn't stay up like a lot of people to watch it. I waited for the exit poll and went to bed because I think, you know, we all expected Labour to have a landslide. But I think for me, something that really stood out, you know, the Green Party, of course, getting 4 seats, you know, that was fantastic. I think they got every single seat that they focused their attention on, essentially, which is fantastic. Quadrupled their number of MPs in Westminster. You know, their vote share, I think, went from something like 4.7 to 10%, up 4.7 to maybe around 7%. I think, I can't remember the numbers, but it was, you know, significantly increased, particularly in Wales as well. So, yeah, good night. I think it shows really that as well. Just a final point, that I think that the electoral system that we've got at the moment just isn't fit for purpose, is it? You know, as much as I don't want to see reform do well, but if you look, for example, I think per seat, I think it's about 1 million votes that they got, which, you know, it's not fair on the people that are voting for them, is it? So, you know, I think hopefully that's something that's looked at now in this next parliament.
So, Mark, you were obviously on the night, sat or stood in the count in the Vale of Glamorgan, so you could see what was going on there. So, what are your reflections of Thursday and the results in Wales?
Sort of broad thing. No surprises. I agree with Brianna. So no surprises. I think there were no surprises that the Tories lost. I think we are too pleased sometimes to think we got a Tory-free zone when actually we've got arguably a party that's not going to change much from where we are if we're not careful in government now. So I think that worries me quite a lot. The Tories, the key to, you know, people like Annan Cairns was toast at the start of this election. You know, in the Vale of Glamorgan, it didn't matter. He had lost. He had lost before the votes had counted. That was quite clear. In Barry, which has got some quite strong Tory areas, which we did a lot of work in, you know, the signposts weren't up, the signs weren't up. It was clear that he was gone. But I think, you know, one of the things that I took away from this election was that it was a bit mad. So we got everything we expected, but we also got some really weird things. You know, you look at it and you think there were more votes cast for the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party than there were for the Keir Starmer Labour Party. You've got Starmer's personal vote just being absolutely decimated in his constituency. He still won. Jonathan Ashworth, people like that, you know, someone who was put out every day by the Labour Party, losing his seat to a pro-Gaza or a pro-peace candidate. I don't think it's pro-Gaza, you know, someone who actually wants to see peace as being the starting point of where we are. Liz Truss, you know, she had 26,000 majority. To lose that is incredible. The funny thing I was reading this morning, though, it said on her leaflets, "I'm standing by my record in government." It's like how to lose an election in one state. Exactly. Just like stick that in there and you just see it go. I think it was absolutely incredible. And now we've got a situation, and the thing that I'm just going to follow up on and agree with Jonathan and Trian on, I think the surprise of reform being, you know, I saw we were sampling boxes in coming out of the central wards in Barry, and the amount of reform voters coming through genuinely put me in a grumpy mood from day one, because we've had them in our parliament before. You know, they were UKIP or whatever, Brexit, whatever they called themselves previously. They did nothing. They'll do nothing again. If we don't do something quickly, they'll be in our parliament, and I'm not sure we'll be better as a result of it. And part of that, and it's, you know, without sounding too trite, it's because the Liberal left hasn't achieved, or central, you know, centrist and left hasn't achieved what it should have done. There are communities that are completely left behind. Public services are decimated. You know, it's a plague on all our houses, and we deserve it. But where that goes worries me.
So again, back to Wales. What were there any standout results? Because I think one of the things that's discussed before Thursday was actually the number of seats that are contested in Wales. I think it's like half a dozen, because especially historically, you know, they used to weigh the Labour vote, in many seats. Plaid have got their heartlands, their strongholds. But what were the standout results within Wales for you? feel free to chip in.
I thought, obviously we were all watching the Ynys Môn constituency quite closely, and because I know Plaid were targeting there, but also Labour were looking to succeed there as well. But you know, Cleanos Medi getting in there, that was one of the results that stood out to me, and also because I don't know if you saw, one of my friends pointed out to me, but the video of her at the end after she'd won and her children running up to her and hugging her, and she obviously feels very passionate about Ynys Môn, so that one really stood out to me. And but also Virginia Crosby didn't lose by, you know, it wasn't an embarrassing defeat for Virginia Crosby, so I think that shows that she's obviously still well respected in that area as well.
And it was interesting because that was a three-way split, because I think Ynys Môn, for people who aren't aware, has been every political party has represented Ynys Môn at some point in the last few years. Jonathan, what was your sort of standout seat? Or
I'm not sure there was a particular one that stood out, to be honest. I think I expected Labour to mop up in Wales, for the Tories to have a really bad night. I think one that probably stood out is the Brecon and Radnor seat, just the Liberal Democrats managing to gain that, particularly because I think there was perhaps a worry that, you know, the Liberal Democrats wouldn't get the seat because there'd be a split between them and Labour, perhaps, and the Tories might be able to creep in because of it, which didn't happen. So I think that's probably one that stood out. I didn't expect the Liberal Democrats to win that, to be honest. I thought the Tories might just hold on to it because of that Labour-Lib Dem split. But I think in general in Wales, I don't think it was much of a surprise, the map at the end of the election, to be honest with you.
Mark?
Carmarthen, I think, I was in Ammanford on election day, helping with the knock-up in Ammanford. And I bumped into Torsten Bell, Chris Bryant was there. So basically all of the Labour MPs were chucked in. I spoke to Torsten and I asked him what he was doing in Ammanford, given it he'd obviously just been selected to go into Swansea West. And he told me that it was 9 miles from Swansea West. And I think that shows a complete disrespect for the communities that he was sent in to go and represent. But Carmarthen, I think Labour threw the kitchen sink at that constituency. They really did want to win it. They wanted to squash Plaid. And then you looked at Anne's results, Anne Davis, she left with a majority of over 5,000, which I think shows that that's a strong hold. And then people like, you know, I'm being very pro-here, but people like Ben Lake has now turned Ceredigion into a Dover Meirionydd type majority. You know, this is a significant hold that will be very difficult for someone else to come into. You see that Carmarthen's coming the same. I think I'm just picking up on Rhiannon's point about Virginia Crosby. I think that's true. I think the Tory vote, although they didn't win, it wasn't a complete collapse. You know, even in the Vale, Cairns got he came second, you know, got a significant number of votes, more than I thought. He was never going to win, but it wasn't an absolute collapse, and that surprised me a bit. And I'll finish. The standout one for me, though, is the one that should worry us most, is Llanelli. I think that, you know, says everything. They had a point that they were able to work on with the hotel issue from earlier in the year, and you know, that's massive.
And I think it also, Llanelli, I think Reform had a credible candidate as well. So Kidwelly, councillor, you know, sort of businessman. So, you know, having that. But as you say, you know, I think the Stradey Park element, you know, must have played in that one. Rhiannon, obviously, you were sort of looking at the leaders going around, because it was quite telling that on the Wednesday when Keir Starmer came to Wales, it was Caerfyrddin. And as Mark was saying, you know, Joe Stevens, I think virtually every single, Caroline Harris, virtually every single Labour across the south were there to support Martha Angharad. And I think I'm correct in saying that she's actually been sort of full-time candidate for the last few months as well. So it's not just they did throw everything at it, and I think the result for Plaid with a 5,000 majority, that has to be a concern for Labour moving forward. But anyway, on to the UK picture then. We've touched on it in parts, but from a UK perspective, obviously Labour now have a huge majority. What have you sort of made of? Obviously, we saw the exit polls, and I think people were expecting a Labour victory. Whether it was going to be as big as it was, I'm not sure. It was what I was expecting. But from a UK perspective, Rhiannon, how are you seeing things? Obviously, as somebody who's working at the heart of Westminster, what have you made of Starmer's first couple of days in office?
I think the reaction has been, as people have said before, he's not Tony Blair. He's not, this character, or even, Neil Kinnock, who was quite charismatic. He's a very sensible and seems reliable Prime Minister. So I don't know about you, but there's not been as much excitement maybe around the result as what I was expecting. But in terms of before the election, I think when Keir Starmer was choosing to go to places like Aldershot, which are usually Conservative strong areas, and Rishi Sunak was choosing to go to Chelsea, where are also Conservative strong areas, it was very telling how both parties were feeling by the end of the election. The Conservatives were obviously very concerned, and Labour were trying new places. Yeah.
And what do you think of the situation in Scotland as well? Because obviously that was for the SNP. It was it was a very bad night, even though their share of the vote did go down significantly. The number of MPs they have now is down markedly. Some people suggest that in England that people are voting in protest against the incumbent government, but the same thing has happened in Scotland. Do you think is that part of what's gone on up there?
I think so. I think people have with the First Minister going out, and it's been a bit chaotic in Scotland as well. And I think people are just responding to, with Keir Starmer getting in, they don't want the chaos anymore. And I think that's true in Scotland as well, with Humza Yousaf of having to stand down. But I also saw that Nicola Sturgeon had said that she didn't think independence played a big enough part in the SNP's campaign. She seemed to think that they hadn't pushed that as much, so it wasn't as big of a factor in what people were voting for as well.
Yeah. And Jonathan, from a UK level, obviously now we've got a Labour government with a huge majority that gives them, the ability to do whatever they want, basically. How have you seen the last couple of days? Is there anything you've been surprised from Starmer's cabinet appointments, for example?
Well, I think it's fair to say that although he's got this huge majority, it's not sort of built on sand a little bit. I mean, because it is essentially an anti-Tory vote, I think. I think I read somewhere the other day that about 49% of people that voted for Labour voted against the Tories, essentially. They didn't vote because of Keir Starmer. They didn't vote because he's got these wonderful policies. I think people just simply had enough of the Tories and they just wanted to get Labour in. So I think it's going to be a difficult time for him because he doesn't go in there with a lot of goodwill, Labour. So it is going to be pretty tough, and he's going to have Nigel Farage, biting at his heels. He's going to have the Green Party from the left, for example, Plaid Cymru. The Liberal Democrats have come back now massively. They're to the left of Labour at the moment, I think it's fair to say. So he's got to come in from all ends, really. And like I said, he's not got a lot of goodwill, I don't think, from the voters. So it'll be a difficult time for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. It's not going to be a long honeymoon, I don't think. In terms of his appointments, I think the James Timpson appointment is really actually quite impressive. To pick up someone like that who's got there's this background in rehabilitating prisoners. I think that was quite a smart appointment. I think as a lawyer myself, really impressed that he's got a QC that is now the Attorney General. It's a long way away from the likes of Liz Truss, who was Justice Secretary back in the day. And
who elected them, Jonathan?
Well, yeah, well, that's a point, Mark. I'm not going to argue with that. But I mean, I suppose my point is it's nice to see someone with a bit of experience, and they know what their brief is, not, sort of party bag carriers that have done well and got a job. So I think it's going to be interesting. Be interesting what he does in the first 100 days. If he does, roll out any sort of radical policies to sort of keep perhaps the left happy. The trade unions be interesting to see what he does with this new deal for workers, whether he waters that down, for example, which is all, I think it's already been watered down pretty much. So, he's going to fight with the pro-business law, the trade unions. It's really interesting. And I just hope that they do well. I mean, I'm a Green Party member, but I really hope that they do well, because we all need it. It's been 14 years of awfulness. It's about time to get a bit of change.
Mark?
I think there's just picking up on what's been said, I think, to a large extent, where we've got a majority that's, I think the phrase is, mile wide and inch deep. So there is, and that's Scotland as well, man. The reason Scotland fell so markedly is because what they were left with after the last general election was a huge number of marginal seats. And as soon as one resurgent comes up, they all become vulnerable. And I think that's where we are now. I think there is no chance that Starmer will become more radical with power. I think he is Rachel Reeves holds the power stick there. And I think the fiscal rules they put in place mean that you will not see anything change. I think he was asked already at the first press conference about the removal of the 2-child cap, which is abhorrent that we deliberately put children into poverty. It is abhorrent. And yet it isn't the first thing that he goes, we were wrong on that campaign. I'm going to go in there. First thing I do. He could have made a huge difference by doing that, but Rachel Reeves would have chopped his knackers off, I think, if that had been the case. So I think there's that scares me a lot. I think Scotland's fascinating, Hugh. I think that's something the media's not really making a play of it. I think that, and Rhiannon's point about leadership is key there. People do not, they want to see a leader do well. We hope Starmer does well. We really, we want to see better. And I think that when you've lost someone of the caliber of Nicola Sturgeon, and then it's just gone downhill from there. And I liked Hamza Yousaf. I think he was a good guy. I think he stood for the right things, but he clearly didn't have his team on side. And now I think you get the impact of that quite clearly. But, I looked at, there was a result. I think the skew of results is quite fascinating in that I think it was Southwest Norfolk. The winner won with 26% of the vote. So 74% of the people in that constituency didn't vote for the person who will represent them. That's bonkers, isn't it? That's just wild. And
especially with low turnouts as well, it's actually, the percentage goes down. I think somebody did some sort of analytics, and basically majority of seats, they were either 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. People have actually voted for the one who'd won. So Rhiannon, as somebody who's got her ears to the ground in Westminster, what's the perception there of Keir Starmer? Because I think it's quite clear to say, he is, seen as a steady pair of hands, maybe, seen as being boring. His campaign was very, very safe and focused on, a core messaging. Do you think that's going to be a challenge for him, in order to gain popularity moving forward?
I don't know if it'll be, maybe for some people, like as I was saying earlier, we've had a lot of chaos over the past few years. Maybe someone that isn't maybe as charismatic as we're used to, or someone who is just focusing on some sensible areas is what people want. But again, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know what it'll be. And I do think you know, Angela Rayner has a bit more of that. She is when you watch her in interviews, she comes across more as a real person, maybe, and she's got a bit more to say and a bit of banter sometimes. So maybe the balance of them two will work well, but I certainly don't think, as Mark was saying, I think, but I don't think there'll be many surprises coming up. I think Keir Starmer will stick to what he's been campaigning on, and yeah, I don't think there'll be many shocks coming.
I think it's interesting, you know, the point you make there around sort of Rayner and her popularity. I think, you know, that she is somebody who people do see as popular. Mark.
Two things that just occurred to me there. One is there was a really interesting article written by Dan Evans the other day about professional managerial classes taking over. And I think that's what you've got, with the exception of Angela Rayner. She's the only exception. The reason she's real is because she is real. So I think her in that cabinet will be really interesting dynamic, and see where her power base lies, because I think she brings a different perspective to that. And that isn't about where they were educated and things like this. This is a broader thing in terms of their capacity. And I think the other thing that we really need to be mindful of is when they bring other people into that cabinet and they're bringing extras into it, then I think the tension between this elected party. So if I was, who's the shadow attorney? Emily Thornberry, you know, accepting Jonathan's point, there's a KC in there now, not somebody who isn't. You could argue that's for the good. But for someone who's had that shadow brief for all that time to be overlooked, especially when she was put out to bat on Gaza so quickly as well, I think there'll be some tensions in the party which will be simmering. It's a bit like Labour in Wales, isn't it? They've simmered. So it's clear that there's going to be moves against Gethin, but they haven't done it because the party needs to win the general election. So the discipline will be really tight. But
talking of discipline, because it is interesting, one of the big challenges, and I think this is something that people haven't considered, is with having over 400 MPs, managing that number of MPs, you know, sort of being a whip in that situation, because, you know, the odds are you are going to have scandals and calamities. It's just the way of the world, and how they're going to deal with that. So just thinking now, so moving ahead now to the Senate election. So it's 669 days, I think, if my maths is correct, to the next Senate elections in May 2026. So it's, you know, it's going to be Starmer's first big test. We've seen in this election in Scotland and in England, you know, is it the incumbent government being given a kicking, and with, you know, the situation and the, you know, around Vaughan Gething. Because in Wales, you know, sort of Labour's vote share in general, it went up a lot in Scotland. It was up a little bit in England, but again, that makes a big difference because it's 84% of the population. In Wales, it was down 4%. So for a party that's, you know, riding on the crest of a wave, that really isn't the result that you're looking for. How do you see that impacting on the Senedd elections in 2026, Jonathan?
Well, I think the first question is whether or not Vaughan Gething will lead them into this Senedd election. I think that's a decision the Welsh Labour Party will have to make pretty soon. I think, you know, in terms of opposition parties, I think they'll all want him to stay there, because I don't think you know, he's particularly popular with the Welsh public. I think he'll help opposition parties if he stays there. But I personally can't see him leading them into the 2026 election. I think he's damaged goods now. I'd be surprised if he's still there by the end of this year, to be perfectly honest. I think the difficulty for Labour as well going into these Senedd elections is that they've got no one to blame now, have they? You know, I think over the last 14 years, they've pointed the finger at the Tory government and said, well, you know, it's their fault, we don't get the funding, etc., etc. We've all heard the story. And they've not got anyone to do that now. So I think they're going to have a really difficult time. What worries me, however, is that rather than parties on the left, like the Greens, Plaid, doing particularly well. I think Reform, if Labour don't get their act together and things don't change in Wales particularly quickly, I think Reform could mop up here, and I think they could take a significant number of seats. Like I said earlier on, I don't think it was all calculated. Farage launching his manifesto or contract rather in Merthyr. I think it could become a stronghold here for Reform, which makes me shudder, to be perfectly honest. But I think it's the nature of it at the moment.
But I'm just going to share this clip from this morning's Sunday supplement. So Kim Howell's one of the big...
Share is vital when it comes to the next Senedd election because they're fully proportional. Does Welsh Labour need to change its leader? I mean, is Vaughan Gething, newly elected as he is, already damaged goods?
He is damaged goods, and Welsh Labour needs to change its leader sooner rather than later. The problem is they've got to find somebody to replace him. And to do that, they've got to show some spine and some determination, and they've got to get on with it. Because I spoke to other former MPs in the run-up to this election. All of them from Wales, all of them said to me, if this had been the Senedd elections, we'd have lost them.
Some people even think Labour would have come third.
There's a very good chance of that, I think. There's a great deal of disillusionment out there about the performance of Labour in the Senedd, and they need to get a grip.
So, yeah, not the ringing endorsement that you would expect 2 days after a landslide Labour victory. So, Rhiannon, coming back to you, so from a Westminster perspective, how is that dynamic viewed in Westminster? Is Vaughan Gething seen from a Westminster perspective as a weakness for the Labour Party?
I think from a Westminster perspective, it was quite a shock to see him in Carmarthen on that final day of the election, because even though Keir Starmer has stood by him throughout, and when we've spoken to the shadow cabinet as well, no one criticised him, and I know that was in their interest and in the Senedd members' interest at the time, well, before the election. But to put him front and centre on the final day of the campaign, I think that shows that maybe he isn't going anywhere, and the London team are hoping that this will blow over now. The donations scandal will blow over, and he'll be able to stick around, because 2 years is a long time, and by then people might have forgotten. People do forget pretty quickly, but yeah, I'm not sure. I think it'll be an interesting one to see. I think the next maybe month or two will be very telling as to whether he'll be around.
Yeah. So Mark, you obviously down on the doorstep there. How do you think he was a factor? Because I was surprised that not surprised that Vaughan Gething was put front and central, because he's a man with incredible self-confidence, and he wants to put himself in that position. But do you think that it did have an impact in places like Caerfyrddin?
I think it had an impact everywhere. I think it appeared on every opposition party's leaflets. You talked about it on doors when you spoke to people. I think it has a massive impact. I think there's a couple of things. So Kim Howell, isn't it great when you're an ex-MP having talking about the guts to go and depose a leader? Labour don't do it. They're not like the Tories. They don't have the I'm trying to make sure my words are carefully chosen. Sometimes you need a bit of guts to go after your leader, and it doesn't happen. So Welsh Labour need to find that now, but I wonder whether they will. The second thing, my personal view, I think this will be done really quickly, because I think somebody's going to do something. And I think, if Only Talking Wales could come back next Sunday, I've got a sneaking suspicion we'll have something to talk about next Sunday. So I think somebody's going to go after him, and I think they'll only do that in the knowledge that others will be with them. I think the challenge, so Jonathan's saying opposition parties would prefer him to be there. Given the relationship with UK Labour, I actually don't think it matters. I think that the challenges that relate to the funding for Wales and things that Wales should be having, will not be changed, whether it's Jeremy Miles, another, or Vaughan Gethin running Welsh Labour. I think that we've still got that opportunity to be able to have that chance, because it won't be solved. So the crux of what will happen in the Senedd election will be related to, have we solved people's problems in Wales? And if we don't, Reform will be the ones in the picture in the main, and parties like the Greens and Plaid Cymru as well. But one of the last thing, sometimes we run scared of Reform and tackling them and actually going after them. We don't go there, tackle these people, and actually take them on in competition, which is what an election is. And I think we need to start that today. The 669 days or whatever it is you calculated, that means the election starts today in those areas, and you need to start dealing with the issues that they're bringing up. As this is what concerns me, because it is a poison that goes quite deep now, and turning people, if they get this for another 2 years, 2 years of Farage and his enticing others having a platform from Westminster, that is truly destructive stuff. So we've got to start now, but bring it on, I think.
Jonathan, as somebody who until recently worked with one of the trade unions, how do you see, because I think Port Talbot is going to be one of the key areas, there's been discussed, quite length in the last week with the closure of the blast furnace. It doesn't look like the blast furnace is going to be recovered, and there is going to be this transition to green energy. Do you think that Gethin's sort of stock basically is going to be relied on, because obviously he was backed by the unions?
Yeah, well, he was heavily backed by the unions. I think there was that incident with Unite as well, wasn't it? But the unions will obviously want him to stay. He's got that relationship with them, and they'll feel like they can work better with Vaughan, hence why they backed him.
But why do they think? Why is that then? What is the tie-up there? Why was so strong that link?
I think it's his background, isn't it? So he was a trade union solicitor. He was a president of the Wales TUC. I think he was a former GMB shop steward. So there's that history there, and there's obviously those relationships as a result of it, which obviously are very important in politics. But I think, look, I don't think Vaughan Gethin is going to be able to do much about Tata, unfortunately. He went on this trip to Mumbai, I think it was. He didn't even meet the top dogs, did he? There. So,
First class travel as well.
Yeah, it was just a bad look, wasn't it? I thought, to be honest. I just thought he'd come back looking a bit daft, if I'm being perfectly honest. But I don't think he's going to be able to do much about it. And I think, it's an awful situation, an entire community decimated essentially because all these jobs go in. And I think, the Welsh government, unless they can convince the UK government to really put some money into it, nationalise it perhaps, then I think, unfortunately, these jobs are going to go, and there's not much Vaughan Gethin or the Welsh government can do about it. But we know Keir Starmer's not going to nationalise steel. He's although he probably promised it when he ran for leader, but he's not going to do it now.
Yeah. So, Rhiannon, I'm just thinking of the Conservatives, because obviously, this has been really bad result for them, and for them to build towards the Senedd elections. It's interesting, Andrew R.T. Davis has been on television this morning, basically trying to sort of probably Welshify the Conservative brand more, which is quite interesting, seeing as he's been campaigning around the small boats and the immigration thing. I think he's going to try and shift more towards appealing to agricultural and rural communities. What do you think the Conservatives are going to have to do now, between now and the Senedd elections, to get a foothold back? Because obviously they have got representation there. So, and they are, after the election with PR, they will still have representation. But where do they go from here?
Yeah, that was interesting to see him sort of trying to be more Wales-based when, he has been one of maybe Boris Johnson's biggest supporters really using Boris Johnson in Wales to appeal to Welsh voters. But on sort of a different point, I was listening to Robert Buckland after he lost his seat, and S4C asked him, you know, would you consider the Senedd elections? And he said, I wouldn't rule it out. So maybe bringing in those bigger names for the Welsh Conservatives would help them in Wales. I know he's obviously based in Swindon, but he's originally from Llanelli. So I don't know, maybe some of those Conservatives that have lost their seats in the general election, would they consider coming to the Senedd? That would be quite an interesting one, and maybe a way for the Conservatives to stay relevant. But I think it was also interesting that as even before the results finished, Andrew R.T. Davis was on Twitter saying we've let everyone down, and really trying to maybe get sympathy from the voters, and sort of maybe now realising that the best way to go about it is to admit that maybe stuff hasn't been as he would have liked.
And I think it's fair to say that they were riding on quite a sort of a crest of a high wave after Boris Johnson, Brexit. So, you know, they were at sort of quite a high point. Mark, what do you think? Do you think we'll see the likes of Virginia Crosby standing in the Senedd elections?
So bizarrely, Robert Buckland once stood as a county council candidate in Barry back in the day. So I can see him and others, Alan Cairns, David T.C. Davis, if they want a job that means they don't have to do very much, I can see them all rocking up to the Senedd in 2026. The challenge for the Tories. I think the Tories weren't decimated on Thursday as I thought they were. So they and it's more and other places they're a competitive threat. But I think what the problem is that when you lose the people who were leading some of those campaigns, you take the Vale, Alan Cairns, you know, whether you agree with it or not, and largely I don't, but he did bring some money into Barry for Marina, you know, for levelling up. Do you know any people with yachts who are poor? I don't, but there you go. Maybe the sort of thing he wants to do. But I think when you lose the talisman like him leading some of the campaigns, it means that there's a husk then that won't be able to pick up the local campaigning. And I think that's where this next election will be interesting. Because if you need to, if I'm right, that you need to start campaigning today, they've got no one to lead it anymore. So what happens? They wait until 4 weeks before the election day and start, and that, you know, that could work to some extent, and it will work to get under PR a number of them in, but I don't think it'll be enough. And whether they see, you know, room to work with the likes of Reform in a Senedd, I think that ultimately ends the Conservative Party, frankly, and it will just be taken up. You've got the Sarah Atherton calling for Farage to be brought in as a Tory MP this morning. You know, that's broken. That's a party that's broken if they think the person who defeated them elsewhere should be in that party.
Right, so I'm going to put your heads on the block now, Rhiannon. How do you see the makeup of the Senedd looking? 96 members, proportional representation, closed lists, and that's something we're going to be discussing in the future. But what do you see the makeup of it being? Labour down, Plaid up, Lib Dems, Greens, Reform?
It's a tricky one with 2 years to go, but I think now with Nigel Farage in Parliament, Reform will be able to stay more relevant, and I think by then Reform will still be around. So I definitely think they're going to have representation in the Senedd in 2 years' time. In terms of the others, you know, it would be nice to see the Greens in the Senedd, but I'm just not sure if Wales is there with the Greens yet. But yeah, I don't know. I can't really call it in terms of Labour and Plaid.
Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I'd definitely like to see some Green members. I think that would be great. I think they did pretty well in Cardiff, so it might be a surprise there. I think sort of Mid and West Wales you might see them sneak in as well. I think Labour will be down. I think just inevitable, really, given that you've got a UK Labour government. I think there'll probably be some difficulties for Welsh Labour because of that. And Reform, I think, as Rhiannon said, with Nigel Farage now having a platform in Parliament, if they give him enough TV time as it is, but he'll probably get some more now as well because he's an MP. So I think, I hate to say it, but I think Reform are going to do very well, especially if things don't change pretty quickly for people in Wales. And I can't see that's going to happen. I mean, just look at the Welsh Secretary, for example, or the new Welsh Secretary. 2 years ago, she was saying that we should be getting our bonus consequential for the HS2, and now she's rolled back on that. So I think, unfortunately, Wales are going to probably be we're not going to do well in the next couple of years, and I think Reform will probably do well out of that.
Mark, what do you think? And especially Plaid Cymru, based on their best ever general election results.
So best ever general election, that's great, and we're really pleased we've got 7%. But the reason I put 7% doesn't win you anything, does it? That's the point. So the best ever is a platform that you need to build from to move it on quite a lot. I think there's a couple of things. One is the electoral system suits bigger parties. So if Reform become a bigger party, it suits them. So I think it'll be tough for the Greens. They need to, as a minimum, in the dual constituency, to get something between 12 and 14% to get the first seat. That isn't straightforward. So I think and then the same for the Lib Dems as well, frankly. Plaid, we should be in the space to do some of that. But I think previously, if you'd asked me prior to this election, and Reform being just a backwater type thing, I would have said this is Tories going down, Labour going down, Plaid going up. That's the way I would have seen it. I think Reform's move into this space now changes the maths markedly, because you've got having three parties. There's a maths that works out of the D'Hondt system. Having four parties, it changes in its entirety. So a party that needs, like Plaid, that needs in some of these locations perhaps to be a better third than a poor third to get the sixth seat, for example, to become a 2-seat player. It now changes that because Reform would have got that earlier in the process. So you need to be looking at Plaid to make a real difference, would need to be leapfrogging the Tories in some of these spaces. So a lot of work.
And again, this is a question to all of you. Do you think there is the potential for Reform for it to be a high watermark? The Brexit Party did well ahead of the EU vote. And then following that, their vote went down because their purpose had gone. This election, you had an incredibly unpopular Conservative party with a lot of people protesting against that party. So, there is a chance. It could go either way. They could increase their support if people still disenchanted, disenfranchised, or potentially they could fall back. Do you think that there could be a high watermark, or do you genuinely think that they can build on what they've done because they haven't done it previously? Rhiannon, Rhiannon, you're looking deep in thought there.
I think it'll depend on who the Reform, if they are Senedd members, who the Reform Senedd members are, because as you say, if you've got people like maybe Gareth Beer in Llanelli who have got experience in the area, then they're more likely to do well and to be able to pass where UKIP couldn't.
And I think in the Vale, was it Carolyn Jones who stood there, ex-UKIP Senedd member, Mark?
No, there was a guy, I can't remember his name now. No, it wasn't Carolyn.
But it was within Carolyn Jones. She stood somewhere, wasn't she? I think she was.
She could well have done, but it wasn't the Vale.
Was she? I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I would imagine we'll see some of the old UKIP Brexit, whatever, the iterations they've been coming back through.
Their high watermark, though, Hugh, is dependent on Welsh government delivering public services that make people feel their lives are better. And in the 2 years, so I think it is possible to make a difference on some of those, but I think I've struggled to see it going to happen. So if you want to stop reform, deliver public services, end of. If you want them to continue on the path we're on of austerity and broken public services. You know, when you've got Wes Streeting talking about, you know, in a typical Wes Streeting way about the English NHS, the starting point is it's broken. You know, there's not much. That's not a policy, is it? But the diagnosis is absolutely correct.
So, moving on to final thoughts, because I think it's been a really interesting discussion we've had this morning. Do you think, and I think Rhiannon will come to you first, do you think that sort of media coverage has had an impact on the election in Wales? Because I say you work for PA. PA have now got a Wales correspondent, but it's only a recent thing, which is great that they've been that they've been added to it. But how do you see sort of media influencing?
I think the media's sort of focus on Nigel Farage made a massive difference, and I think the Conservatives also focused on the fact that they spoke about reform a lot, as well. They were saying a vote for reform is a vote for Labour continuously, therefore boosting reform's profile as well. But yeah, I think in terms of media coverage, I thought it was quite interesting. I don't know if Mark's got any insight on this, but it was, and I know Reen is Plaid Cymru's party leader, but we didn't see as much of Liz Saville Roberts, who is the Westminster leader. But in saying that, I do think Reen ap Iorwerth's presence on the broadcasters did well for Plaid. I think he came across quite well. He didn't come across as someone with maybe a chip on his shoulder, as some people might interpret. He came across as quite someone that was asking for sensible solutions to Wales's problems. So yeah, as I said, I think the media's focus on reform definitely made a difference to their popularity, because at the end of the day, they were still a party with no MPs, but the level of coverage they were getting maybe didn't match that.
Jonathan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I thought Reen ap Iorwerth had an absolutely fantastic campaign, to be perfectly honest. I think every time I saw him on TV, he came across really well. There's that Good Morning Britain interview he had as well. I think Kate Garraway, with Kate Garraway, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but when he was talking about the HS2 money, I thought he came across fantastically, and he was, as Shannon said, he didn't come across as someone who sort of had a bee in his bonnet about certain things in Wales. It was more like the way he was talking to them. He was sort of educating them about the funding and that kind of thing. So I thought he had a fantastic campaign, and I think in terms of media focus on Wales, I think we get very little in terms of the UK media, but I think with Talking Wales, other publications as well, hopefully over the next couple of years and leading up to the Senedd election, there's the public sphere will grow in Wales, and because of that, of course, people become a little more educated in what they're voting for in Wales, which is only a good thing, of course.
Mark?
I think Reen's campaign was probably the standout performance. I wonder, going to Rhiannon's point, whether or not the networks asked for Reen primarily. He just made himself available. My understanding, he was, turning up in Nottingham 1 minute and somewhere else. So he was prepared to go out there and be the person who was doing it, and leave Liz, run their own campaign, and also supporting Llynnos in Anglesey and actually on the ground stuff, which Liz is very good at. So I think perhaps that might be some of it. But I think the media spotlight. So I think Plaid did quite well, and there were lots of people. Same thing happened with Sturgeon, didn't it, a few years ago? People in England saying, "I wish I could vote for Nicola Sturgeon." I think Reen built up his profile, which is going to stand him in good stead and the party in good stead in 2 years' time. And the difference is, though, I think it's how do you maintain that from this point on? Because, you know, most of our media, despite things like this, Hugh, and you know, this is a laudable attempt, and we want to try and break this cycle. But you know, people listen to BBC Radio 2, they read the Daily Mail or the Sun. You know, this is our media consumption, is English media consumption, and the difference in Scotland, where they've got a media that's been there for such a long time and a bit more well established. I think that's a difference with us that we really need to break into. But you know, this starts now, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's why we're here and we're having this conversation this morning. Just thinking again, just what we've all been sort of discussing now. We've had a general election campaign where it's been very presidential. It's been Sunak and Starmer. We've had Ed Davey falling off all sorts of things into water. And fair play to, I think, you know, he's done a good job with raising their profile. My youngest daughter, Betsy, who is 11, she doesn't know who Sunak Starmer is, but she liked the funny man who kept falling into the water. So, you know, there is a cut through there with some voters. But thinking ahead to the Senate elections, we're basically going to have, you know, the figureheads are going to be Rhun ap Iorwerth for Plaid Cymru, Andrew R.T. Davis for the Conservatives, Jane Dodds, who I think is quite a good public speaker, Anthony Slaughter for the Greens, and again he's raised his profile, and his results in Cardiff showed that he's got popularity there. But it's going to be Vaughan Gething, not Starmer, at the moment. And as for Reform, it's going to be difficult for them to have an MP for Clacton campaigning on behalf of them for the Senate elections. So do you think that's going to have a, you know, basically because we're going to have a different focus on who the leaders are and those conversations, how do you think that's going to impact on the Senate elections? Rhiannon, I'll come to you, seeing as...
I think it obviously does make an impact. I think, as you say, particularly for Reform, you know, Nigel Farage is the face of it. And a lot of people might have been thinking that they were voting for him. You know, we saw, I can't remember what media it was, but there was a member of the public who was confused as to why Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer's names weren't on her ballot paper. So there are people who definitely do focus on the party leaders.
Jonathan.
I think Farage can have an impact wherever he is, to be perfectly honest. I think he's such a big figure, you know, and particularly because of the likes of social media now, you don't necessarily, you know, elections are running a different way now, aren't they? You know, you've got TikTok, Twitter. So I think, you know, if he does a little whistle-stop tour around Wales, I think, you know, he can assist the votes for Reform. So I think he'll have a part to play in the Senate elections. There's no doubt about that. You know, as you mentioned, in terms of who runs the Welsh Labour campaign, that remains to be seen. I think Mark said earlier, you know, the next couple of weeks could be critical for Vaughan Gething. I definitely agree with that. I personally think, you know, I'd be very surprised if he's still there by January. I think, as I say, he's damaged goods now. And Rhun ap Iorwerth, he's had a fantastic election campaign. His stock has grown, and I think people, you know, will take Plaid a lot more seriously because of the campaign he's had. So it's going to be really interesting, and I think, you know, a lot will depend on the UK Labour government, what they do for Wales, and if they don't do much for it, then, as I said earlier, I think Reform will have a really good time.
Mark, what are your views on that?
So I think one major, perhaps faux pas in your introduction to this question, Hugh, is expected. Will Andrew R.T. Davis be leader of the Tories in that time? Question mark. Reform, every time you dig into anybody who's a Reform candidate's past, you find racism, sexism, misogyny, you find all sorts of bad things there. So I think that's one of the things they need to really check their candidates. And if one of them is going to be the spokesperson, you know, are they capable? And I cannot see it being Vaughan. in the election that's coming up. So I think that's all, dead cert it won't be, in my view.
Well, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having your company, and I look forward to having your company again in the future. So, Mark Hooper, Rhiannon James, Jonathan Williams, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much.
Diolch.